This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Spiritual Psychic with Sara Wiseman, where you'll learn how to unlock the secrets of spiritual intuition and your own psychic gifts. Here's Sara.
Welcome everyone to Visionary Psychics. I'm Sara Wiseman, and we are with one of our visionary psychics, Rebecca Berry. So Rebecca, welcome to our discussion about intuition and all things metaphysical today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Rebecca has a very interesting past. She's an intuitive, a clairsentient, and also a spiritual coach. But she also has a very long, successful career as an author of two fiction books. And she's been in some pretty prestigious places like Redbook, New York Times, on The Moth. And so you come from this really interesting creative background. And I guess my first question for you is, and this is kind of a big one, but how have your psychic gifts informed your writing? And how has your writing informed your psychic opening? I just would love to just go there.
Wow. Yeah, they're all, that's perfect because they're all, so, I mean, I think I always moved through writing intuitively. I mean, I remember I wrote for magazines for years, and then there was a point where something inside of me said, you know what, your stories aren't in New York, you have to go back home. Mm-hmm. So I moved back home, and that was really an intuitive move. There was I remember at the time people were like, you're crazy. Right. But I was like, I know this looks crazy. Something told me I had to do it. And it was correct. They were upstate. That was my first book. A Novel and Stories was about upstate New York. My second book, which was a memoir, was also that. So I think most creative people actually are using their psychic abilities and their intuition all the time. They call it different things. I think but so. For me, I'm always listening to something that's telling me what the next path is. I don't always listen very well. Like we just self-published a book of my dad's photos, and that came about because I was sitting down and I said, it's time for a new project. What is it? And I had 5 things. I was like, I want to finish this children's book. I want to do a screenplay. And the thing that came in was, you need to do a book of your dad's photos. And I was like, really? Yeah. But I did it, and it was our COVID project. And now he has Alzheimer's, and the book is out, and people are receiving his work, and it healed our family in a lot of ways. It's feeding his joy in a time in his life that might have otherwise been sad. Yeah. So I think that, so to answer your question, I feel like I've always been in touch with that. And then when I started taking it seriously and saying, this is intuition, these are psychic abilities, they're real. I'm 50. I don't feel like ignoring them or calling them something else anymore. Yeah. Then it got really exciting because I'm always talking to a million things, and now everything is telling me a story. Yes, right. And I love stories more than anything, and I love telling stories, and I love talking to everything. So now I can talk to the trees and the spirits, which I've always been doing, and it's just a wonderful listening practice.
Yes, absolutely. I know that there's one practice I do that I really enjoy where you just connect into various objects in your house and you listen to their stories. And, we think all of our stuff is just quietly sitting there obediently waiting. Yeah. And no, it's completely, there's a very large conversation. Like every single one of those books, has something going on that it's ready to tell if we tune into it.
Yeah, you did. I took one of your courses, or it was part of one of the modules that we did, and I listened to your recording, and I remember I had, you asked us to listen to the objects in the room, and I had a little alpaca that my grandmother brought back from her trip to Peru. Mm-hmm. And that started talking to me immediately, and it was so funny. It was sort of like, I'm here to bring you the glory of the mountains.
Right.
Sitting on my bookshelf, but it's like, every time you look at me, you should remember that how emerald, and how there's a part of the world where everything is, where the mountains are emerald.
Right.
And that was such a beautiful thing to think about.
Yeah.
I've never been to Peru, but the visual was so nourishing.
It just all came in at once. Yeah. So when you moved, you talk about moving back home, and where is that for you now?
Oh, it's in upstate New York. Upstate, like way upstate, not just outside of New York City.
And so where you are now, though, aren't you more by the coast? Is that still a part of your journey?
No, that's only sometimes.
Okay.
I
guess where the piece I'm trying to get to is, I know that you and I have talked about, you've had a lot of nature connection with ocean beings, and that's very unusual. At least it's probably not very unusual, but it's the first time I've met someone that's actively engaged in sort of listening to that. What is that? Tell us about that.
Well, I have a very serious, it's not serious because it's completely fun, but I have a very dedicated practice to singing to the water and listening to the water. And I started that here in upstate New York. And then every time I go to the ocean, I tune into the ocean. And it's a very simple practice. I go, I sit, I sing something, I sing a chant, or I sing whatever feels like coming through. And then I just write down what comes in. And so I have a lot of messages from the whales. I get a lot of messages from whales, and I get a lot of messages from the water. And it's just the water, the water holds the memory of the planet. It's a very alive, beautiful, life-giving force. And so it's just a really amazing practice, and the water has a lot to say.
What are some of the themes that you've noticed coming up when you're doing that channeling, I guess I would call it?
Well, my favorite one, which comes up often, is there's one, I wrote it down somewhere, but I wrote them all down, but it's just, don't, one day I went and I was like, I feel so stuck. And the water was like, I sing all day. I sing at night. I sing during the day. I sing under the moon. I sing under the sun. And I'm always moving. And I don't worry about what other rivers running better than me. I don't worry about, which river is stronger or weaker. I just flow and sing.
Yes.
And then it was like, move through your life this way, with a light, joyous heart and constantly singing. And I really try to do that. It doesn't always work, but that's pretty constant, just when things get stuck, just look for flow.
Look for flow. Yeah.
Don't worry about what other rivers are doing.
Right. Does the Indian Ocean look better in a bikini?
Right.
I don't know. Just something like that. So no. Yeah. And this practice of singing, which is very interesting, how did that come to you? You just felt it? You just felt called to begin this language exchange, or?
Well, I come from a family that always sang. So my grandfather was an accordion player and very talented musician. He could play the auto harp. And he was he was an upper crust Brahmin, Boston. Well, he wasn't from Boston, but they were very sort of waspy in their class.
Stoic, yes.
But he was so fun, and he could play anything by ear. He could play piano, auto harp, accordion. And so every summer when we would get together, all of us would sing these old. He had taught in a school in Appalachia in Kentucky when he was a young man. And so this WASPy family knew all these old mountain songs.
Cool.
And we would just get together and sing them. And I loved it. Everybody in my father's family had beautiful voices. And so it was this sort of hidden, beautiful thing that would happen where all these people would get together and sing together. So I've always loved singing. And there was a point where I learned in my late 40s, I started learning guitar and ukulele. And then when I started meditating by the water one day, it was sort of like bring your ukulele and sing. So I did.
Yeah.
Also, I did know that, water really responds. I had followed Dr. Emoto stuff about how if you want to heal water, sing to it.
Yes. Yeah.
That it changes the water. And I thought, I've been an activist and trying to help keep water pure, not clean. And I thought, I don't want to be screaming at people.
Right.
So if singing helps it.
Well, it's interesting that sometimes when people are in a state of receiving a lot, as you are when channeling, there's a lot of emotion that comes up when you're receiving. Like, it's just so much. And singing is this way of opening the heart. So like you're opening your heart and then you're receiving information that opens the heart further. And then so it's almost like a release valve for all that emotionality that's coming in. Or maybe it's something else. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a release. You're 100% right. And I hadn't thought about that. It's a release valve, but then it almost realigns your frequency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it releases and then it also adjusts.
Yeah, it vibrationally shifts you completely.
Yeah.
So that in combination, I have never tried. I mean, I also receive from the guides in channeling, and I have never tried. That's a very interesting idea to add singing or toning or some other practice to enhance that. It just puts you into a more transcendent state, which makes the receiving even easier. So when you're receiving in writing, so it's just you and your little notebook down by the water. So
yeah. And I get really amazing. The other day I was down and I got this poem, and it was I had just visited a house in Boston that had been a slave owner's house. And so I had all this, interesting information, historical information about this building. But then when I was by the water, I actually really wanted to write about something else. But I started hearing the voice of this woman who had lived in this house, and I just wrote it down and didn't think about it and came home and I read it to my husband, and he was like, whoa, what is that? That's beautiful. And it was not my voice at all.
Right.
It was not, but it was so cool that she just popped in.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the question is, are you really a writer because you've been psychic forever and that was just the vehicle you moved out all this receiving into, this ability to pick the history up from everything? Yeah, that's extremely interesting.
Yeah.
So when you think about things like when you go to a historical place and you start to just feel everything that ever happened there, when you think about past lives for yourself, does anything resonate a lot, or do you have specific attachments to specific places or times that it's really coming in heavily?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have. And it's so funny how it happens. Like I remember when I lived in Paris, there were certain places where I was just like, ugh, I don't want to go there. And at that time, I was in my 20s. I didn't know anything,
Right.
And I just thought that was funny, But when I went to Mexico a couple of years ago, we went to a place by the bay. And everybody got sick but me. I was the only person in the group who didn't get sick. And so everybody was miserable, and I was so happy. I felt bad because I was like, this is the best vacation.
Yeah.
I felt like my soul, I feel like that's my soul country somewhere in my being, which is strange coming from such a deeply white Quaker person.
Right.
But every time I go there, and every time I hear mariachi music, I love mariachi music, love it, love it, love it. Every time I hear it, something breaks open in my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about intuition. It's not just in this time, in this lifetime. We're often going into different realms. We're going into maybe the departed or past lives or future lives, or the ability to astral project to a different country in mind's eye. And so it's a very rich experience, and kind of being able to just tune in anywhere. You don't need any particular tools. You just, once you know that path of how to tune in, just can be a continual thing, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think most creatives are doing that anyway. They just call it different things.
You
look at somebody like Mozart or Van Gogh or anybody. It doesn't have to be somebody who's famous. Anybody who just decided to open. Then, you ask most people where their work comes from, and it's usually like, well, it came from outside of me. I was doing this, and then whoop.
Yeah, or it's just like, I have no idea, it just came through. And that's that kind of receiving without because so many writers are like, I want to write this, and then they sit down and something completely different arrives on the page, and they're like, okay, I guess this is what I'm meant to do.
And I remember reading something, this made me so happy, reading something in the New Yorker once. I think it was in the New Yorker, and it was about Flannery O'Connor. I think it was Flannery O'Connor. Hope it was. But it just was her journals from a period where she was in a writing, some kind of a writing colony or something. And it was pretty much every day was like, please, please, please send me a story. All I want is a story. And it was a very, I have, when I looked at her work, I was like, oh, I see. It really brought something, it helped me, because I was like, I do that too. All artists are asking for the song, asking for the story, and that's been going on forever.
Well, and I probably not everybody listening knows about Flannery O'Connor. She was just this really highly acclaimed American author, but she had lupus, and so she, had to just sit. She couldn't go a lot of places. She did travel a bit, but her life was, by many accounts, kind of a smaller life, and yet perhaps even because she was in this stabilized small position, the receiving was even, she did not have the ability to distract herself that much, and from that came the gift of this high level receiving. Because it is a lot of fun to do a lot of things, but in creative process or intuitive process, it's always stillness. It's solitary. It's quiet. You have to be super relaxed to just let everything come through.
Yeah, and you kind of have to give up. You have to give up the idea of yourself as the author.
Yes.
And that was hard when once I did it, it was so easy. It was so great. But and every so often it clicks into me a little bit where I'm like, well, wait a minute. No, that is mine. I did do all that work to get that thing. But if you can, or I won't speak for anybody else, for me, when I can just sort of let the stories that are around me come through, it's much easier. I don't have to work as hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes what I found creatively, when, like I say, a book comes in, it comes in all of a piece for me. At the very beginning, I didn't even know we were going to have this discussion, but it's pretty interesting. At the very beginning, I would have to write and rewrite again and do that 10 more times. And then after a certain level of getting your craft up, it just came in, and there it was. And that was a great relief, because not having to be in charge of what was arriving anymore, and that allowed this concentration on just just the receiving of what was meant to get out, which was nice, a nicer way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get to receive the, I was thinking about this at Thanksgiving, and I was thinking about it recently, talking about my mother. I was telling a story. It was a story that my mother's heard 1,000 times. She was telling me a story. It was a story we both told each other 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I thought, and I was thinking about, part of me was like, oh my God, we tell this story over and over. But then I was sort of like, well, part of the beauty of receiving a story or telling a story, often it's just as much for the teller and the recipient, because there's a joy that comes every time you're receiving a story and then telling a story. There's a real joy that comes through, and an adjustment that comes through for the storyteller. That's lovely.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like you are journeying together to that place or that dimension or that piece of time where all that happened. You're going there again together, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
It's really lovely. It was a really nice experience, even though I was like, God, I don't even remember what the story was, but it was like, I've heard this story, but it was just a really, you could almost see it, the energy winding around each other.
Right. Absolutely.
It's really
well, I guess, is there anything you would like to add to what you've learned about, I think the idea of, you said earlier, you reached a certain point in your life where you just decided to take intuition seriously. It's like, no more messing around. This is happening. I'm going to do it. And then what happened from there? Did you immediately trust what you received? Did you come to any breakthroughs? What was that like when you kind of said yes, like, I'm going there?
Well, I think there was a point where I was kind of like, and I think perimenopause had a lot to do with it, but there was a point where I was like, man, I'm almost 50. This was a little bit before I turned 50. I have been listening to this institution and that cultural norm, and the voice that I really want to listen to going forward is the wisdom deep inside of me. I just want to really hear that. And so as soon as you do that, you get a bunch of challenges in trusting yourself. So it has been definitely a practice in trusting myself, and it deepens all the time. But one thing that really profoundly strikes me is that the more I listened to the crazy voices in my head, and that told me to do crazy things like sing to the water and do all these things, the happier I am.
Yes, absolutely.
For me, being crazy was a route to just real wonder and delight and curiosity, all those things that and joy, all those things that everybody puts on their wall.
Yeah, well, to freedom from, I guess the words I would use is like, we get so locked up in this ego container, everyone telling us what to do, and then we're just like, why am I even wearing this ego blouse? I'm just gonna I'm not taking, we just set that aside and go, what else is there? And then it's like, everything's there. The cultural norms and the misbeliefs are so narrow. I guess they're designed to keep us, safe, whatever that is. But really, they aren't really all that useful for a life. They're really not.
Well, it's interesting because my son was, we just watched a documentary together, and it was on surfing, and it was from the 60s. And the narrator had that 1960s male newscaster narrator voice. And it was like, the boys are getting in the water now. And later after that, we watched it together. We had a good time. Later after that, I watched Wheel of Time. And I
haven't seen it. Okay.
Oh, it's delightful. But I was so thrilled watching Wheel of Time with the different faces and the different, you just see so many different ethnicities. It's like, it's a recreated world where everything, you have people who have dark skin and blue eyes, different kinds of hair, and everything is great. And I was thinking, gosh, it's amazing how much more open media television media is now compared to that narrator who had, and I was thinking about, that narrator was the voice of sort of the 1960s man, that everybody was sort of like, this is the 1960s man, and this is sort of the world that we're living in. And listening to that tone, I just thought that everybody sort of bought that as the protector or the person who's taking care of things, but it's a hollow sound. And when I watched this new, I just thought, gosh, it was such a narrow perspective. And everything's changing now, which is really fun.
Everything is changing. I started to notice that in 2000, I guess. Maybe no. Anyway, maybe about 6 or 10 years ago. It wasn't immediately recent, but it wasn't that far away. And I started to notice media changing, like ads changing, and things becoming more about oneness or interconnection or
emotion.
And that's where, with the advent of communication with our devices, the whole world's changed. And that's fantastic, because the more people that are able to tune in, if we say this idea that we're collective soul, but only like 4 people are connected into collective soul and aware of it, and then suddenly if there's 4 million people aware of it, the world changes pretty quickly. It's beyond even tipping point. Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and I will put the place where people can contact you below. But I sure appreciate your time and all of your sharing. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Sara. I could talk about this forever.
I know, it's so interesting. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.